You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Get on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and with me today, of course, is my good friend, Mr. Nick Kendell. Nick, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, doing pretty well. Looks like we're going to have another great weekend of weather here. And, man, it's the Combine, so actually have that on in the background, watching the big boys run right now, the offensive linemen, and really just excited. You know, it's a great time of year.
Yeah, for sure. We're maybe going to go hiking tomorrow.
Oh, man.
Kind of excited, so we'll see how that goes. But also want to let our viewers know that we are joined today by a very special guest. He is a mathematician and data scientist for Pro Football Focus. We have Timo Riske of the show. We're bringing him here on the show. He had a couple articles recently that really caught the attention of Nick and I, and we've been discussing them probably since they came out almost every single day, talking about something with them. And so we'll kind of dig into that as we go here. But Timo, how are you doing out there?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks for having me. So I always enjoyed talking about football. So yeah, let's have some fun time.
Yeah. And for our listeners, Timo is from Germany. And so we're very, very excited to have one of our football brotherhood from over the pond to be joining us here today. So make sure that you're following him on Twitter. You can find him at PFF_Moo. Make sure you go there because, again, his article's spot on with everything that's going on with the draft. And you can also find us on Twitter. You can find me at Carl Dumler MHH and Nick at Nick Kendell MHH. And you can, of course, follow the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod. And make sure you subscribe to our show wherever you listen to podcasts and leave us a rating. Also, don't miss out on all of our great off-season content at milehighhuddle.com of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Also know that our podcast is powered by Overtime Media.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, and welcome back to Building the Broncos. Again, we are joined today by Timo Riske of PFF, or Pro Football Focus, whatever you want to call it. But Timo, let's start off. How did you become interested in the NFL?
Yeah, so I'm generally interested in basically sports, so in every sport. And then at some point we just watched the Super Bowl with some friends. It was the 2008 Super Bowl, so Steelers against Cardinals. So this was my first NFL game ever. I had no idea about the rules. But I somehow liked it. And then I started following the next regular season and so on. And at some point I couldn't stop it anymore.
Yeah, well, awesome. It's glad that you are joining us now in the American football realm. I got to ask, who is your, I guess, soccer team of choice? Is Frankfurt is the team of choice? Are you more of a big Bayern fan or a Dortmund?
Yeah, actually, it's Dortmund. So Dortmund. My father was a Dortmund fan, or is a Dortmund fan, and I took this from him. So yeah, so I'm a Dortmund fan in soccer, Germany.
Okay, awesome.
Do you have a favorite NFL team?
Yeah, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So so I suffer just as you as the Broncos for the last few seasons. I suffer even longer.
Yeah, definitely. I'm one of the main, I guess, voices for the Broncos, and Andrew Mason is a long-suffering Tampa Bay Buccaneer fan as well. So I got to say, if you guys take the player I want at 14 right before the Broncos pick, I'm going to be a little bit disheartened, and I'm going to hold you responsible. But I guess nerding out a little bit now on my end, I want to ask you, how specifically did you get involved in the analytics side as well? Now, the listeners may not know, I actually have a master's degree in epidemiology, so have a little bit of statistical analysis background, but that's probably one reason that your work spoke to me so much. So how did you get involved in the analytics side?
Yeah, I mean, you already said that I'm a mathematician, so it was quite natural for me to get interested in the statistics side of the NFL. And that's pretty much it. So I gathered some public data from different websites, and did some things with it, and it became more and more, and at some point I met some great people, in particular the guys from PFF, and here I am. So
the rest is history.
Pretty much it. Yeah.
Well, good. That's what we love here. We'll just kind of give you a little rundown of just our show a little bit. Nick and I, we met because we both love how a team is built, how they find talent, how they go about the draft, the offseason. And this is why, again, we loved your articles that you just recently wrote on kind of breaking down the draft and different positions and where to take them, where's the value to take different positions. This is we've been nerding out since we saw your article.
That's great to hear, man. And I think it's very interesting because the NFL season is like 4 months. If the team doesn't make the playoff, your NFL season is like 4 months. But I think January to April or May is just as interesting as the actual season. There's so much going on, draft preparation, free agency, stuff like this. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, so awesome. I want to dig in here since we got a couple studies here that we want to go through with you. But your first study was the investigating the historical draft success of different positions. You did both the offensive side and the defensive side of the football here. And I just want to, get into the core of the study here. So in your words, what would you say was the aim of the study going into it?
Yeah, so of course we know that in general teams or also public draft analysts are doing a pretty good job in the sense that the better players are drafted at the start of the draft and the worst players are drafted at the end of the draft. So that's generally true. But so what's interesting is to actually quantify how large is the difference of a player drafted in the first round compared to a player drafted in the second round on average, and also quantifying the uncertainty. So what's the chance that a player in the second round is actually better than a player in the first round? Stuff like this. And of course, what's even more interesting is doing this, just as you said, doing this for different positions. So are there positions where teams have been better at drafting? So are there positions where teams manage to get all the great talent in the first round, and there's no talent left in the later rounds? Or are there positions where teams had no idea of how to find talent in the early rounds, and then the talent in the late rounds was just as good? So of course these are the extreme cases, and it's just interesting to look at how this shakes out for the different positions. So that's pretty much what I did.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting that I don't want to go too far down the outcomes here, but a lot of the quote-unquote premium positions, such as quarterback, offensive tackle, edge rusher / pass rusher, and cornerback, had a kind of a strong correlation that the earlier you took them, the more likely that pick was going to be a hit. So the NFL did a better job of identifying the better talent early and selecting them.
Yeah, so that's an encouraging result, I think. And I mean, it could even be true that it's because there are such premium positions. So, the teams know they're so valuable, and they need to get guys, and maybe there are more resources put into scouting them, or they're already more important in college. So, and when they're already more important in college, it's easier to figure out who's actually good in college.
For sure.
So this could somehow be connected. So the positions are so important, and that's why that could be why NFL teams are better at finding the talent.
Potentially a little bit of selection bias in there. So I guess some specifics here. The data set it used here was for all PFF grades, what selected model, if it's passing grades, pass blocking grades, et cetera, from the years 2006 to 2019. So the PFF era, and the modeling that you used was the Bayesian posterior mean. Can you give us, I guess, a novice explanation of what the Bayesian posterior mean is?
Yeah, it's I mean, it's basically just the average grade for each player, but it's adjusted for sample size. So, I mean, what we do at PFF is for every play, we create a player on a discrete scale between -2 and 2 and 0.5 steps. So there are like 9 different grades. So -2, and this is really rare. I mean, a grade of -2 means he was really bad on that snap. So this happens very, very rarely. And a grade of +2 means that the player did something really great on this snap. And then you can just take the average grade per snap for a player. And this is usually a number very close to 0. So it balances out. And usually a player has a lot of good snaps, a lot of bad snaps, and it somehow balances out. And then the average grade is close to 0. But I wanted to use every player that ever took the field, even the players that played like 100 snaps, but then they turned out to be really bad, and then they never played another snap. So the problem is, if a player plays only 100 snaps, it can happen that his average grade is really low, because the fact that the grade averages out over a lot of snaps didn't happen, because he was just so bad over 100 snaps, and then he faded out of the league. So to account for this, there's this technique of Bayesian inference, which is just, it takes the average, and it basically, I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than this, but it basically accounts for sample size. So if we have Nick Bosa, who played only 1 year in the league, and he was really good, and then we have Von Miller, who played like at the same level, or let's just assume they played at the same level, but Von Miller played at this level for like 9 years now. So we are much more confident that Von Miller is an elite edge rusher, and we are confident that Nick Bosa is an elite edge rusher. So so the Bayesian posterior mean is higher for Von Miller than for Nick Bosa, because Von Miller played at this level much longer. So we should be much more confident in that he is a good player. So if I want to analyze whether a player drafted at some draft position is good, I should account for how long he played in the league, because I don't want it to happen that a player played only 50 snaps, was really bad, and then he breaks the scale to such an extent that my result gets affected too much from a player who played only 50 snaps against a player who played like 2,000 snaps or so.
So you're essentially like weighting the variable for something that has a larger sample size, just because you have a better idea of what that player is going to be.
Right. That's pretty much it.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Hopefully you those of you who still here, big nerds like us, but no, really, really good job breaking that down. The variables here for this first study here, the X was where the players were drafted. So what draft order, first overall, 100th overall, and the Y was the percentile of selected grades. So awesome. And a lot of these, the study as well, it flattened to day 3. So I think one of the best findings I found in it, that everything after the top 100 essentially was a quote unquote crapshoot.
Of course, it's some selection bias, because obviously there are so many players who get selected in the 7th round or 6th round, who maybe even never even make a roster, or they make a roster and then they never see the field or stuff like this. And obviously we can't really account for this.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, they will probably be very bad. I mean, that's the reason why they don't make a roster. I mean, if the coaches are not completely idiotic, it's probably because they would be bad if they were on the field. So there is some selection bias. So in reality, the curves would go down on day 3, even at least a little bit. But the general truth that the further we go down the draft, the higher is the uncertainty.
And that makes sense because players that are first-round picks, second-round picks, they're going to be given multiple chances to succeed even when they're failing, where if you're a day 3 guy, you might be off the roster after one bad camp.
Yeah, exactly. And this is also the reason if you look at the curves. So, I mean, I also put the uncertainty in the curves. So I have this ribbon in the curves. One looks at the article, and you see that for earlier picks, there's actually a lower floor than for later picks, and this is basically just what you said. I mean, if a player is picked in the 6th round and he's not good, then he can't harm your team because he's just he probably doesn't even make the roster. Or he plays only a few snaps and then the coach says, okay, that's not it. But if you pick a bad player in the 1st round, that really harms your team because you're probably trying to give him like 2 or 3 years to develop. And then he gets a lot of snaps and he plays bad. Mm-hmm. So the floor is actually lower for high draft picks because if he's bad, you will give him more chances to show that he's bad.
That makes a lot of sense and definitely lines up with what we see in the NFL. So, and I got to ask you, how much do extreme outliers impact your model? You know, you have guys, there was one, I think it was the interior defensive line model with pass rushing where Aaron Donald was farther from the mean than any player on the floor because he has been that dominant.
Yeah, but actually, I mean, the curve is of course smoothed. So, I mean, obviously it can happen that if I look at the average for each single draft pick, then it can of course happen that the average for the 45th pick is higher than the average for the 41st pick. So, but of course, I mean the average is smooth, so that it's monotonically decreasing. So that so obviously if you draft a player later, you expect him to be worse. And because of this smoothing, the single outliers they don't change. They can't change much. I mean, they basically change just what they should change. So they reflect that there's a small chance of getting a very good player even in the later rounds. I think this is the extent to which the outliers that we determine for Tom Brady. Or all the other guys who were picked late and
Daniel Hunter, etc.
Yeah.
So, okay, and I got to ask you as a statistician, being an epidemiologist, the R2s, the R-squareds were relatively low for those of you who are novices in the statistical world. If your R-squared is close to 1, that means very good predictive value. And the R-squared for the closer to 0 is the less predictive value the model has. So is there anything that you took away from the R-squareds as far as, you know, maybe some concerns in the study, or just you're looking at general trends here and, you know, looking for the overall, the trend in the data as opposed to it being a law?
Yeah, I mean, I think the low R-squares are basically telling us that the uncertainty is really huge. I mean, from a per pick basis. So the uncertainty for each single pick is really large. I mean, that's basically the huge takeaway for any analytical draft analysis. No matter what you do from an analytical standpoint for the draft, the takeaway is always that the uncertainty for each pick is really large, and that's of course reflected by the low R-square value. Then, but of course there are some positions for which the R-square value is a little bit higher, like cornerbacks, offensive tackles, quarterbacks. So basically the premium positions we've already talked about. But for a lot of positions, it's really low R-square value. So on a per pick basis, the uncertainty is really low, really high. Teams weren't that successful at drafting players. So there's a general trend, but the uncertainty is really, really high.
All right. Well, we kind of wanted then to get into your findings here, and really kind of, I guess, kind of look at some positions the Broncos have taken, especially recently, and then also look at just the overall, I guess, picture of what you were trying to paint here. But let's start with the quarterback position, because of course that's the one everybody wants to talk about. And the Broncos, with taking Drew Lock in the second round, what does your study say about trying to take a quarterback there in the second round?
Yeah, the second round is basically the mid-second round is basically where the curve starts to get really low. So for quarterbacks, you basically always want to have a stud, because even a quarterback in the 75th percentile usually won't get you far. That's a quarterback that can win you some games, that can get you into the playoffs if he has a very good supporting cast, good defense. But to be a team that can make playoffs like almost every year, that gets a chance at the title perennially, you really need a stud. So you need a guy in the 90th percentile. And the quarterbacks that were drafted in the second round, historically, they have like a chance of 5% to achieve this. Ooh. So Drew Lock's chances, given this draft position, were like 5% to become a star. And I've just looked at his at our grades for him for his rookie. Obviously, he didn't play much, and it hasn't changed much. So his outlook still looks. It's not surprising when he has only 169 pass attempts or so. So that's not much. And so his outlook looks pretty much the same like it was when he was drafted. So there's a 5% chance that he will become a star.
So you're saying there's a chance?
Yeah, there's a chance.
Carl's doing the same thing.
I was, yep. It's too easy not to do that there at that point. But and that's, you kind of expect it. Quarterback is one of the hardest positions to find that true stud, and most of them that can be a stud, usually you know what they look like in college. There's very few that turn from Tom Brady into Tom Brady. And so definitely makes sense that is one of the positions that really sees such a huge drop-off after, top 10 picks in the draft. But, all right, well, let's talk about some wide receivers then here, because this is kind of the position everybody's thinking for the Broncos early in the draft is they're looking like they might need two wide receivers, either one in the draft and one in free agency, or two in the draft, whatever it may be. What does your article say about trying to find a stud wide receiver?
Yeah, for wide receivers, it's quite interesting because, when they were picked early in the first round, they were generally pretty good. There was some. Our recent memory tells us that it wasn't that book, because we remember 2015, 2016, 2017. There were some not so good wide receivers in the first round, like John Ross, Laquan Treadwell, Josh Doctson, Rashad Perryman. So there were really a lot of wide receivers in the first round. It didn't really pan out, while other receivers later, like Michael Thomas, Chris Godwin, Juju Smith-Schuster, and so were picked later, and they were really good. But if you look at the data from 2006 to 2019, then first round wide receivers have been really good. But it's also a position that doesn't see a huge drop off to the second and the third round. So it's generally okay. You have okay chances to find a really good wide receiver on day two, especially given the class this year, which is supposed to be really good and really deep. It might make sense to trade a little bit, because I've looked at your draft picks. So the Broncos have 2 third-round picks. Obviously, their second-round pick. So they have, they have four picks, right? 4 picks.
Actually, they have 5, because they have the 49ers third-round pick and the Emmanuel Sanders trade, and the Steelers third-round pick from trading down last year. So they have 3 third-round picks.
So they have 3 third-round picks and a second-round pick. So they have four day 2 picks. So they could. It obviously depends on on what the other teams do. So if a CD Lamb should somehow drop to 15, which I can't really see, I'm not sure about it, but it obviously depends. I mean, if all the other teams draft quarterbacks like crazy and defensive players and the offensive tackles in the draft, maybe some of these top 3 guys in the class fall to 15, then it might make sense to not pass on the value that such a wide receiver in the first round is supposed to give you. But I think if the top 3 guys are gone, then you probably want to shift the wide receiver to day 2 and look what's on the board on 46, or even a little bit later.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and that kind of aligns with where I'm shaping up after the wide receivers doing the drills yesterday, where if Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, or CD Lamb are there at 15, even though you can find wide receivers later, if you have a chance at a 90th percentile or better player, which, again, you never know for sure. The draft is an inexact science, but you can take one of those guys at 15 and feel good about it.
Yeah. I mean, if one of those drops to 15, then you can definitely take a chance without feeling bad about it.
Awesome. Well, tight end is one where the Broncos probably aren't going to go there round 1. Obviously, there probably isn't a round 1 worthy tight end this year, but I guess just talking about it, with the Broncos win against trends last year with drafting Noah Fant at 20th overall, and how does that, I guess, project to his future? Again, is he going to have to be a Drew Lock where he's going to need to be an outlier to work out, or is that somebody where, he has these athletic tools, potentially can be a guy that they lean on, or do you think that was probably a little bit more, based on the data, a little bit more foolhardy for the Broncos to go with a tight end in the first round?
Yeah, based on the data, teams haven't been really good at finding tight ends early, and they have been relatively good in finding them on day 2. So the curve for tight ends drops beyond the 50th percentile, so beyond the average, much later than other curves. So you can find above average tight ends on day 2, and the day 1 tight ends haven't been as good as the day 1 wide receivers or day 1 quarterbacks for whatever reason. Probably because they aren't asked to play as a receiver as much in college and wide receivers. I mean, this will be my simplest explanation, but I don't know for sure.
That is really interesting.
So from this standpoint, it might have not been the best decision to draft him, but at least they traded down, I guess, to draft him. So
kind of mitigates some of that risk, adding extra capital. So good. And one here, I think probably one of the most interesting findings of your study, and something that analytics will be happy about, analytics Twitter: running backs don't matter. A 0 percentile drop off from round 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4. So if Denver's looking to find a running back to complement undrafted free agent Phillip Lindsay, the data would suggest that, you can take one early, but odds of finding one that is that much better than one later on, especially one day 3, is minimal, if at all.
Yeah. There doesn't seem to be any change. So if running backs have more get more yards when they were picked early, it's just because they get more opportunity. So obviously Ezekiel Elliott got more carries in his rookie season than running back in the 6th round or so will get during his rookie season. But from an efficiency standpoint, there doesn't seem to be a difference between running backs picked early or picked late. So, I mean, they're just, especially for a team like the Broncos, I think there are just too many holes to fill.
That makes sense.
To draft a running back on the first 2 days. And yeah, I mean, they've just found Phillip Lindsay like two years ago as an undrafted free agent, and so I'd probably just take a few chances at undrafted free agents each year. Maybe draft someone around 6 or around 7, take chances, and the data says so. Every third chance you take on a running back will pan out. So that's fine.
That is fun, and hashtag running backs don't matter. But now it gets interesting, probably something that's been one of the most interesting and contested areas for the Broncos. Offensive line. I thought it was interesting. Your study found that drafting for run blocking is more impactful in the run game than drafting running backs. But the big finding was offensive tackles. If you want a starting tackle, offensive tackle, or even a 90th percentile and an elite offensive tackle, you need to take them round 1 because those guys typically are taken round 1 and are not found later in the draft.
Yeah. Offensive tackles is another position that has been drafted really well in the first round, and there was a pretty large drop off to the second round or the third round. And this kind of surprised me because I've also remembered some bad picks like Craig Robinson in 2014 or stuff like this. But actually the most of the guys drafted early have been really fine, and it seems like teams are very good of scouting them from college to pro. So if you wait too long to take your tackle, the other teams have probably stolen all the good ones already.
That makes sense. Premium position, a little bit of selection bias. Those guys are getting gobbled up. I did find it interesting, though, that you did not see that the case for drafted interior offensive linemen. So while obviously there are outliers like taking Quentin Nelson at 6 overall, really good, the data says that you can wait and find your interior offensive line later in the draft, and you should be fine.
Yeah, exactly. So based on the data and also based on the positional value that other metrics of us have shown, there isn't really a reason to draft an interior offensive lineman in the first round. So it might make sense to take a shot at them on day 2. So third round is probably still a good opportunity to improve the interior offensive line.
So like waiting to draft somebody like Dalton Reisner makes more sense than taking Quentin Nelson round 1 the year before, when you can use that pick on a guy like, I don't know, Bradley Chubb.
Yeah. Or you can also trade down or stuff like this.
That makes sense. And now we should kick it over to the other side. The one that had the highest drop-off from the first round to the second round, cornerback. Now, why do you think this is? Why is it that teams are so good at evaluating elite cornerbacks, and the good ones almost always are the ones that are drafted early?
Yeah, this was really surprising to me because within the NFL, so once the cornerbacks are in the NFL, our cornerback metrics, or generally, and cornerback metrics are really volatile from year to year. So it happens very often that a great cornerback in one season is not so good in the next season, or a mid-lane cornerback is suddenly really, really good in one season, and then maybe gets worse again in the next season. So cornerbacks are generally really volatile once they're in the NFL. So I was really surprised to see that teams have been so good at drafting them. So I'm not really. I don't really know why. I have no idea why this is the case. So I can't imagine why you can draft them, evaluate them better than safeties or linebackers in coverage, because they're just asked to cover wide receivers one-on-one much more often, and which is also something we found, that it's much easier to evaluate a defensive back when he has a one-on-one matchup against a wide receiver than when he is in zone coverage, playing help or stuff like this. Which intuitively makes sense, because the cornerback is asked to cover this wide receiver one-on-one. Then you can see what he does in this matchup, and you can easily evaluate him. So maybe not easily, but easier than a safety in zone coverage or a linebacker in underneath coverage. So
higher probability of hitting that pick or that cornerback being one of the best ones. And that wasn't the case for safety as much.
I don't know why cornerbacks are have been the best of all positions. So this was really surprising to me. But yeah, that's what the data said.
Safety and linebacker safety specifically was a little different. You saw a good correlation there with drafting for run defense, but not so much for drafting for pass defense, which in a passing league means, to me, probably if you can't avoid taking a safety early, unless they are a Derwin James, Jamal Adams, do everything kind of guy, absolute freak, then maybe you should be better off looking elsewhere.
Yeah, I think the most important part for safety, if you want to draft him really early, is that he's versatile, that he can do everything. Mm-hmm. He should be able to rush the passer, he should be able to play in the slot, he should be able to play in the box, he should be able to play free safety. So I think that's the most important trait of a safety nowadays.
I thought that the most interesting thing here from your defensive findings was that the NFL has a really, really hard time of identifying linebacker talent, and that there was little drop-off, if any at all, between drafting a linebacker round 1 to round 2 to round 3, which the Broncos fans have been screaming for linebacker for years now. And this data, I'm going to be coming back to this, I think, for probably a decade, saying you don't have to use a first-round pick on a linebacker. You can find a guy day 2 and you should be fine.
Yeah, I think so too. So especially if you have other holes to fill and there are other valuable players on the board, then you should probably overlook the linebacker on day 1 and not be too confident in your evaluation on a really good linebacker, because there were other teams in the history of the last 13 years. There were other teams that were confident about the evaluation on linebackers, and obviously it wasn't so good after all.
And for edge rusher and interior defensive line, specifically edge rusher, you could draft early. Those guys tended to go early. Not probably as much the case for interior defensive line, but I felt like the general takeaway I took was if you're looking for a pass rusher and they are evaluated round 1 worthy, typically that guy ends up being, one of the better players at his position in the league compared to other positions.
Yeah, so definitely. So edge rushers were another curve where the early picks were really good. So I'm just looking at the curve runs again, and so all the really elite guys, so all the guys that are really like in the even better than the 90th percentile, so say the 95th percentile, they were like all taken in the first round. So there was like I have no idea who it is, but there was like one outlier.
Probably Daniel Hunter.
Maybe, draft pick 70 might be Daniel Hunter, yeah. So there's like one guy who's also very high later.
Oh, 17 overall. I bet you it's Ryan Kerrigan. Probably. Daniel Hunter went in the 3rd round. How he went, he was drafted really young. He's kind of a weird story, but again, an outlier. So, all right, so I guess wrapping it up here on this one so we can get on to the next section. The Broncos have multiple needs, but based on the data, if you're looking for round 1 for Denver, how would you categorize these needs based on the findings, if you could take them? In a perfect world, even prospect on each one. Offensive tackle, wide receiver, cornerback, and interior defensive line. How would you rank those?
I mean, the Broncos are in a very, very good position. I think that their needs fit perfectly to the findings of the data, because all the positions that the Broncos need have been found to be drafted very well in the first round. So that's good. But if we assume equalness of the prospects, then I'd probably start with cornerback. Cornerback, then second, probably tackle and wide receiver. So based on the finding of the draft success article, tackle might be even better than wide receiver in the first round, but a wide receiver is generally a little bit more valuable. So if you find a really good wide receiver, then it will help your team more than when you find a really good offensive tackle. So this is why I would probably put tackle and wide receiver on the same level. So generally, tackle is more important to pick in the first round because the drop-off is higher, but wide receivers are generally more valuable. So
interesting.
So these two effects might offset, And then I'd probably put tackle and wide receiver on the same level, behind cornerback, and then interior defensive line.
Well, that's I guess that's a win-win on our end, because really you can just let the board dictate it, and whatever is the best offensive tackle or wide receiver left, you can feel happy about taking them, most likely.
Yeah, so the needs of Broncos fit perfectly to the results of the article, so that's interesting.
Well, coming up, sixes. So, all right, we should take a quick break here. Went a little long on that one. I didn't want to cut you off because you were on a roll, and that's some really awesome, interesting findings. But we're going to take a break. Next, we're going to come back and talk about the learning curves from college to the NFL and kind of just how long it takes young players to adapt and acclimate to the NFL game. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Timo.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and we are back with Timo Riske from Pro Football Focus, mathematician, analytics. Just got done talking about his recent studies on the NFL being able to identify players based on their position and whether or not they hit them based on where they're drafted. Now we're going to talk about learning curves. And again, this is a PFF study. They actually use PFF WAR here. So I guess before we get going, what is PFF WAR? Because I think maybe there aren't some baseball stat nerds out there that don't know what WAR is.
Yeah, so WAR is for wins above replacement, and it's a metric developed by my colleague Eric Eager, and it should basically tell us how many wins a player is worth above a replacement player. So if Patrick Mahomes gets injured right now and is replaced by a replacement quarterback, so maybe even worse than Matt Moore. So I think even Matt Moore has positive wins above replacement, so even he's better than a replacement player. So basically, if we have to replace Mahomes, so if the Chiefs had to replace him by a quarterback that you can find on the street, or not on the street, but on practice squads or that isn't signed with any team. How many wins would the Chiefs lose on average if they had to replace him for, say, one season?
That would be okay with me as somebody who follows the Broncos.
We can do this for every. Yeah, you would definitely be okay with that, because that's a pretty large number for quarterbacks. And we can do this for every player in the NFL now. And so this is so we can just think of it as a proxy for the value of an individual player that he adds to his team.
Well, that's awesome findings. And I saw in your study that rookies typically increase their production by 75% in their second season. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So this is kind of encouraging for every team that had rookies that struggled a little bit. But it also means that I think this is maybe even the more interesting takeaway, that you can't really go into the draft and expect that your needs for the next season are immediately filled. Because I mean, if you have a daring need for the next season, you should probably try to fill it via free agency or via trade or so. Usually, you cannot really fill it via the draft because the players obviously need at least a year to reach their full potential. Of course, there are exceptions, players who are really producing at a high level immediately, but generally, rookies don't play to their full potential.
And that's a great takeaway and finding, and something that I think fans and even people who cover the draft like Carl and I need to emphasize when we talk about the draft, is that you can get some return year one, but odds are you're not really going to figure out who this player is until year 2, year 3, maybe even year 4 for some positions. So I guess we should move on now to the positions. Drew Lock, coming into his second year here, only had 5 starts last year, a lot of starts in college, but a guy that, he showed some flashes last year, not a high volume of passing though. So rookie quarterbacks, they tend to struggle, but what is the year 2 outlook for somebody, just a sophomore quarterback in general?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely expect him to get better. So I'd probably even say that I mean, what he did during this 5 starts, he had some good games, like against the Texans or against the Lions, I think. Obviously, he had a very bad game against the Chiefs, if I remember correctly.
I was there. It was not great.
But, these 5 starts, they probably do not matter this much. So, I mean, he would be expected to take a step forward in year 2. And if he doesn't, this would be probably a reason to worry. So what he did in those 5 games, the bad games are not really a reason to worry. The good games doesn't mean that he will become a starter or so. But if he doesn't take this step forward in year 2, then then there are some reasons to start worrying about whether he will become a good quarterback.
The Mitchell Trubisky effect. If they're not good by year 2, maybe it's time to move on. So, good, noted. Moving on now, running backs. Running backs, in your study, you found that running backs tend to produce almost as much day 1, year 1 as any other position. So for, expecting Phillip Lindsay to all of a sudden take this next step, probably foolhardy. But honestly, the one that this brings me back to is Royce Freeman. Broncos took him in the 3rd round a few seasons ago. Was probably my least favorite pick of that draft class. And he's been a little bit of a disappointment relative to his draft stock. And what your dad, I guess, would say is that Royce Freeman probably is what he is. He's not going to change much.
Yeah, probably he's not going to get better. So, I mean, he could get better production if he would be thrown into better situations. If his blockers would be better. So he can still improve his production, but it's unlikely that he gets a much better player in year 3 or even later. And so he's probably risk, yeah.
That makes sense. And wide receivers and tight ends, a little bit more interesting than the running backs. We saw Cortland Sutton take a massive step forward last year. He looks like he's emerging as one of the better wide receivers in football. Can we expect another step up next year, or do you think that this year 1 to year 2 step, this level of play for year 2 is more about what to expect going forward?
In general, it's the huge step comes after year 1. For receivers, or for most positions, the large step comes after year 1. But of course, for individual players, a lot of stuff can happen. But it's definitely an encouraging thing if you observe this stuff, because then you see that he really acclimated to the NFL, and it's also good to see that he takes the usual curve, takes the usual learning curve. So he struggled as a rookie. And really, really good as a sophomore, and whether he will become even better, obviously we don't know this, but it was definitely an encouraging season, I think, for the Broncos from Cortland Sutton. And
what does that say about the Broncos' other wide receiver, Deshaun Hamilton? Is he pretty much what he is?
Yeah, I think the outlook is not great for him. So he got more snaps in year 2 than in year 1. I think 300. Yeah, just looking at 300 snaps in year 1, and then over 400 snaps in year 2, and he actually got worse, right? Yeah, he actually got worse from a production standpoint. Not even 1 yard per route run. So he ran 420 routes and caught 300 yards. So that's not good. So good wide receivers catch like 2 yards per route run. That's what Cortland Sutton did. So becoming even worse in the second year is not an encouraging result. So it would be really, really surprising if he ever becomes a good wide receiver. I mean, maybe he becomes like someone you can keep on the roster and as a receiver or so. But it would be really, really surprising if he becomes a good starter. No, not a good sign.
Not a good sign. Well, that makes the Broncos probably have to look at the wide receiver even more so.
Yeah.
But okay, moving on now.
So he was also drafted in the 4th round. So.
Yeah.
So as in the 1st round, I mean, they don't pan out that often. So he obviously didn't pan out yet, and so it's very unlikely, because I mean it's not that the teams thought he would be like a great talent when he was drafted, because like every team passed 3 times on him.
Yeah,
obviously. So we didn't think he would be great when he came out, and then he has shown us 2 not so good seasons. So yeah, very unlikely that he becomes suddenly a good receiver in the NFL.
All right. Well, one that was interesting here, the learning curve for safety is not so steep, but it takes a long time. So you kind of see them take incremental steps forward. And this almost lines up perfectly with Justin Simmons.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting example. So safety is the first position where the curve deviates a little bit from the standard huge jump after year 1, because there's more like, as you said, an incremental increase each year. And that's exactly what happened for a guy like Justin Simmons. So that's interesting, because it also adds a little bit more confidence to that year, and lets us believe that he can, I mean, maybe not at this very high level, but at least to some extent keep this going. Because obviously this is something that we generally see from the safety position.
That makes sense.
So it's not much of an outlier, and that's always encouraging when looking into the future. When something wasn't a huge outlier, and we can expect it to.
And for the one that I think is probably the most interesting finding that you had here was specifically the offensive tackle. Offensive line takes 3 to 4 years to develop. I guess that means that we should see a pretty big jump from Reisner next year. So maybe he came in a little bit more pro-ready than some other offensive linemen, but in general, year 1 to year 2, you can see a big jump. And so Reisner, I mean, good rookie season. Maybe he's just getting started.
Yeah, offensive linemen generally struggle for 2 years, and then hopefully get it together by year 3. So if an offensive lineman was already very good, or at least a solid starter in year 1, then this could mean that he is somewhat ahead of the curve, and so already takes the jump that other offensive linemen take into year 3 or year 4 already to year 2. So that's definitely interesting to follow.
That is interesting.
A guy like Reisner can already make another jump into year 2.
And probably the one that everyone's been waiting for, definitely I've been kind of hounded about. One question I had to ask you, Garrett Bowles. He's been very much up and down over his rookie, second year, third year, but the Pro Football Focus grades actually like him better than what seems to be general consensus. And your data would suggest that year 4, he might still be just kind of figuring it out. So I guess the biggest thing is should the Bronco fans give up on Garrett Bowles yet, based on what the data says?
Yeah, I think not yet, because I mean I think he improved in every year, or at least he took a huge step forward in year 3, which is pretty much the general behavior for offensive linemen. I mean, measured by our grades, he improved in every year. So from year 1 to year 2, and year 2 to year 3. So that's pretty much how the general curve for offensive linemen looks like. So we could expect him to have another, probably not a huge jump. So he will not become a Tyron Smith or so within one offseason. But we can expect another solid improvement from him. So that's why I would probably exercise the 5th year option.
That makes sense.
Because I mean, it's right now it's only guaranteed for injury, and of course it can always happen that he gets like a freak injury, and then the salary is guaranteed. But when has he even missed a snap or so? I mean, he's over 1,000 snaps in each year, so he seems to be really durable. So that shouldn't be really an issue, the guarantee for injury. So I just trigger the option, and then if he really takes a step backwards in the fourth year, but you wouldn't hope, then you can still release him.
That all adds up. And also, to further build on this point and your findings here, the Broncos take a round one offensive lineman, even though at some point that offensive tackle will probably end up being better than what Garrett Bowles has been or is going to be, that it's going to take 3 to 4 years before you see that offensive lineman reach the level of play where you kind of actually know what they're going to be.
And an offensive lineman, I mean, offensive linemen, offensive tackles especially, are really expensive in free agency.
Oh, man,
even tackles of the level of what Garrett Bowles showed us last year are not really cheap. Like, I mean, the Buccaneers paid like $13 million or so per year for Donovan Smith, who had very comparable grades to Bowles, even a little bit worse. So Donovan Smith was worse than Garrett Bowles in his first 3 or 4 years, and even he got like $30 million per year or so in his extension. So even basically like average offensive tackles get really a lot of money in the free agent market. So so having the fifth year option, which allows you to keep him another year, is really valuable, I think. And the risk is not that huge, the injury risk. I wouldn't overestimate this.
So, and all right, well, before we get you out of here, I got to ask you one more question. Your trends for defensive linemen, specifically, the Broncos have two kind of younger guys that some people have been hoping on, early picks, one being DeMarcus Walker, second-round pick from 2017, another being Draymond Jones, third-round pick from 2019. This will be second year for Draymond Jones and the fourth year for DeMarcus Walker. Your data would say that Draymond Jones still got a chance, could take a big leap this year, but DeMarcus Walker, odds are he is what he is.
Yeah. So if a guy hasn't had his breakout years in, then the hopes should probably be a little bit down. But there's obviously still a lot of potential for a second-year guy like Jones.
Alrighty, well, that was Timo Riske. Thank you very much for taking the time to come on here. I know that it's probably close to midnight over there in Germany, and I believe you have a family as well, so hopefully not keeping everybody up too late over there.
So it's 11:30. My wife is already sleeping, I think.
Okay.
So my kids, everything's fine.
Well, good. Well, we really appreciate you coming on. A lot of good data here. I've referenced your articles, both of these ones, a couple times already with a few of my own pieces, just because I think it's very interesting to extrapolate it to the Broncos specifically. Is there anything you want to promote before you get on out of here?
Yeah, so check out our website, pff.com. So a lot of analysis on there. Obviously, also draft analysis by our draft analyst Mike Renner, who does a great job, I think. That's what I would suggest.
Alrighty, and thank you, Timo. You can find him on Twitter also. Give him a follow at PFF_Moo. This is definitely an easy one to follow, and you can check out his data pieces and just his football takes, and we can all kind of commemorate in our misery that has been kind of wobbling in football ineptitude over the past few seasons. So thank you very much for coming on, and hopefully we'll get you on again here soon as you continue to blaze the trail that is football analytics.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Yep, thank you very much, Timo.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and we are back on the Building the Broncos podcast. I am Nick Kendell, along with Carl. Went a little long there. Hopefully you guys are still with us. I had a few German friends growing up, so the accent did not bother me at all. It just made me kind of thirsty for a beer, honestly. But Carl, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here. Sorry, I just kind of sat back and just let the two analytical guys go at it. And
call it what it is, man. Nerds. Nerds.
No, that was great to listen to, and it's a lot of information. I know it's kind of we're throwing a lot at you, but it is something just to really keep in mind when you're talking about the draft, and we kind of want to dig into that here just a little bit before we get you out of here, and just trying to figure out what this means for the Broncos and what they've been able to do and how they've built their team, and it is kind of interesting just thinking about the last draft. Let's start there a little bit before we get to this one. And talking about Drew Lock, and he said there's a 5% chance that he turns into a star player. That kind of hurt.
Yeah, it did. But that's life.
Right. And I've been thinking about this. I mean, he's right. The odds of Drew Lock actually turning into a stud player are pretty slim. Now, the Broncos with Drew Lock on a rookie contract, that's something else. There is a difference between the two. I think you can still find halfway decent success as a team because you can actually put a really good team around a player that's only making $1 million, $2 million a year at the most premium position on the field. And so now once he gets off his rookie contract, that's when we're going to have another discussion about how much is he actually worth. I mean, we had this with Brock Osweiler, who was another second-round pick. On a rookie contract, it wasn't too bad. You could build a team around him. Obviously, 2015 fit really well. I mean, having a great defense, having enough weapons on offense, they could go and win a Super Bowl. But paying him $18 million a year, that's a whole new picture. So right now, I'm not as worried about Drew Lock and his value and what he's going to end up being. But talk to me in 3 years, and we'll see if I'm still liking who Drew Lock is.
Yeah. I mean, we got to rely on Drew Lock to be a statistical anomaly. I mean, that is what it is, but it can happen, and he's already kind of jumped that first hurdle. So we'll see what year 2 brings and, what comes of it. But it definitely, if Drew Lock does hit and he does become a good quarterback, just know that the Broncos, you can give John Elway and everybody a lot of credit, but there was a huge amount of luck cooked into that. It is what it is.
Yeah, you're right. And, I mean, that's how it's always going to be when you get a quarterback past the top 10 picks. It's complete luck after that, in my opinion. And I think his stats really support that it is asking a lot for a quarterback to rise to that kind of occasion. But I also found it interesting. You talked about the huge jump for rookies to their second year. And I wanted to point towards Noah Fant. Do you know what his stats would be if he raised him by 75%?
I have no idea, but I am excited to hear it.
984 yards.
Oh my gosh.
And
that would be pretty freaking good.
Yeah, you're talking 70 receptions, 984 yards, and about 5 touchdowns. I would take that right now.
Yeah.
I would take that every single season from Noah Fant for the rest of his career. That would be outstanding. It would mean the Broncos, again, kind of went against the norm and kind of lucked out that they found a stud wide receiver that's probably a top 5 guy at his position.
And also just to kind of bring it back for the Hawkeyes, so your Tristan Wirfs just set the vertical and broad jump records for offensive linemen at the Combine. Both of them.
You had to throw that in there, didn't you?
I am just my mouth is full of water and I am just shaking. But okay, so back to the study here. I thought it was interesting that Timo said that the Broncos. I thought his study, based on what he found, that offensive tackle, he would definitely say, well, if the Broncos have an offensive tackle there, they should take it. But he seemed to lean into the fact that any of the top 3 wide receivers or offensive tackle would be an equally good choice for the Broncos, because an offensive tackle, while it's harder to find, a top-end wide receiver on its own can provide more value.
Yeah. I mean, and this draft really does set up so well for the Broncos of not only need but also value. Like you said, it's amazing how this is working out for the Broncos. And I was listening to somebody, I think it was Benjamin Albright, was talking about how the Broncos kind of lucked into taking some positions last year that are nowhere near the talent this year. So just taking tight end last year, and this draft being maybe one of the worst tight end drafts in a while. And so thankfully they don't need to find another guy that's going to be a great athlete on the field for them. Where now they need wide receiver, and oh look, this draft is loaded with wide receivers, and they need some offensive linemen, and oh look, there's some great offensive linemen here at the top of the draft. And so you're right, the Broncos, as much as I'd like them to trade up for a few of the different players that are going to be available, it really does make a ton of sense for them just to kind of sit back and just let the talent fall to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess we get a little long here, but his data on cornerback makes me really thankful and blessed to have witnessed and the Broncos had land Chris Harris Jr., because getting an undrafted free agent at cornerback is probably especially one of Chris Harris's caliber, is about as rare as any position you can find.
Yeah, that he is a true unicorn. There's no getting around that, and I mean the Broncos have done a great job of finding undrafted players and having them turn into pretty decent stars. But I guess you could maybe almost say that the part of that is the Broncos at least give undrafted players a chance to actually make the team. I think there are a lot of teams out there that just really, unless they do absolutely everything perfect throughout training camp, they're never going to be given the chance, where the Broncos at least give those guys a real chance to make a name for themselves and believe that they can actually make the roster. And so, I mean, you would think more undrafted guys, they'd be leaning towards teams that will give those kind of guys a chance. And I do think that does help the Broncos a lot. But even there, I mean, if you look at Chris Harris, part of it I think is the Broncos kind of lucked out that he kept switching positions in college between safety and cornerback, and then he also was just on some pretty bad KU teams after that one great one. And so they kind of got out of the spotlight. There's a lot of things that played into the Broncos lucking out to Chris Harris for sure.
Yeah, nope. Absolutely. So, all right, well, that's going to have to wrap up today because I got to edit this and get this off to Chad. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the interview with Timo. Again, you can find him on Twitter at PFFmoo and find his stuff. I believe a lot of his articles are behind the premium wall, but I mean, if you are a PFF premium subscriber, he does some awesome pieces, and maybe this won't be the last time we get him on here to talk some more specific stuff so we can get behind that wall. But again, appreciate him taking the time to come on and talk some football with us. You can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH and myself at Nick Kendell MHH. Make sure you head on over to milehighhuddle.com, an affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and a comment. And follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast wherever you listen to your shows. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl and Timo, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed it. We will see you soon. Go Tristan Wirfs and go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.